Through decades of studying the human mind, I've noticed that many people feel like pawns on a chessboard, unaware of the game being played. Imagine this. You're having what seems like a normal conversation. The person across from you speaks, softly, maybe even smiles kindly, yet something feels off. Your intuition raises red flags, while your mind races to make sense of it. And then it hits, you've been psychologically manipulated. Walking right into a trap. What might surprise you even more is this. These tactics aren't random. They're ancient patterns I call archetypal shadows, dark psychological mechanisms. Some people use to infiltrate your mind and bend your reality to their control. Stay with me, because what I'm about to reveal could save you years of self-doubt and mental strain. I've often said that everything that irritates us about others can teach us about ourselves. But what I rarely shared is this. Manipulators exploit that very principle. Turning your self-awareness into a weapon aimed at your own mind. In the next few minutes, I'll reveal the 5 most dangerous psychological questions I've identified as tools of manipulation. More importantly, I'll show you how to not only recognize them, but also turn the tables completely. By the end, you'll gain what I call conscious realization, the ability to see through any psychological game before it even begins. I should warn you, once you understand these patterns, you'll start noticing them everywhere. Friends, family, colleagues, even strangers. You'll recognize whenever someone tries to sneak through your psychological back doors. Some find this knowledge unsettling. Are you ready to explore the matrix of manipulation? Let's dive deep into the shadow. Question 1. Why are you being so sensitive? Before I break down this first manipulation, let me ask you something that might feel a little uncomfortable. How often have you been told that you're too sensitive, right after pointing out something that didn't feel right? If a specific moment comes to mind, you've likely experienced what I call shadow projection. Here's what most people fail to realize. Manipulators instinctively use what I call psychological invalidation. They don't directly challenge your argument, they challenge your very right to feel what you feel. Based on my research into the human mind, sensitivity is not a weakness. It is your unconscious mind detecting incongruence. As I once wrote, your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens. But here's the disturbing truth. Manipulators know that sensitive individuals are often the most perceptive. They notice lies, detect tension, and pick up on subtle micro-expressions that others overlook. Instead of hiding their intentions better, manipulators have learned to weaponize your gift against you. Think about it. The financial analyst who spots irregularities in the books is called paranoid till she uncovers a massive fraud. The wife who notices subtle changes in her husband's behavior is labeled insecure until she uncovers the affair. The employee who questions unethical practices is seen as difficult until the scandal comes to light. I call this the persecution of the perceptive. In analytical psychology, when someone attacks your sensitivity, what they are really saying is, stop using your psychological radar. It's detecting things I don't want exposed. But this is where it gets truly fascinating. I discovered a countermeasure that completely neutralizes this kind of manipulation. I call it the conscious assertion of shadow integration. The next time someone asks, why are you being so sensitive? Don't defend, explain, or apologize. Instead, look them in the eyes and calmly say, I'm not being sensitive. Does that feel uncomfortable? Does that feel uncomfortable? Watch closely what happens next. Based on my observations, manipulators typically respond in one of 3 ways. They become angry, revealing their true nature. They deflect the conversation, confirming your intuition. Or they suddenly act excessively nice, a desperate attempt at damage control. And we're only just getting started. Second question is even more subtle and insidious. Question 2. Do you trust me? Stop everything and pay attention here. I made a discovery that transformed my understanding of trust in human psychology. Genuine trust operates unconsciously, while demanded trust is rooted in the ego. Here's the crucial point. Those who insist on trust are often the least trustworthy. I have often said that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But in my clinical work, I observed something important. Manipulators don't seek transformation, they seek domination. The question, "You trust me, right?" is what I call a psychological ultimatum disguised as intimacy. Here's what happens. In your mind, when you hear it, according to my research on psychological complexes, this question triggers what I term the loyalty conflict complex. Your conscious mind wants to trust and be a good person, while your unconscious mind is screaming warnings. This internal conflict is exactly what the manipulator relies on. My work shows that truly trustworthy people never need to ask for trust. They demonstrate it consistently through what I call psychological congruence. Their words, actions, and energy appear aligned. Yet manipulators have learned how to exploit this alignment. Consider the business partner, who refuses to show financial records but leans in and asks, "You trust me, right?" Or the romantic partner who hides their phone but becomes offended, demanding, "Don't you trust me?" I call this trust used as a weapon, from the perspective of depth psychology. This question is not about cultivating trust. It is designed to bypass your defenses and trigger guilt. It shuts down your analytical mind and puts you on the defensive. Here's the response that exposes the manipulator immediately. When someone asks, "You trust me, right?" Pause, breathe, and use what I call conscious detachment. Look at them calmly and respond. Trust is earned through consistent actions, not through questions. Are you asking me to ignore my intuition? A genuinely trustworthy person will respect this boundary and continue proving themselves through consistent behavior. A manipulator, however, will likely become defensive, attempt to change the subject, or make you feel guilty for upholding your standards. Now, the third question is where manipulation becomes truly insidious. Question 3. Are you accusing me of something? Before I explain this psychological tactic, I must warn you it is unsettling. Master manipulators don't just lie. They reshape reality itself. This is what I call the reversal technique, turning the investigator into the investigated. Here's how your mind is hijacked. According to my research on psychological projection, when you notice something suspicious and ask a reasonable question, the manipulator immediately flips the script. Suddenly, you become the problem. You are suddenly the one causing trouble. You are the one who needs to justify yourself. In my studies, I identified projection as one of the most common psychic phenomena. Everything unconscious in ourselves, we perceive in others and respond to accordingly. But manipulators have learned to weaponize this natural tendency, project their own guilt onto you and then attack you for carrying it. It is psychological warfare disguised as self-defense. Let me illustrate. You notice financial discrepancies at work and ask a simple, reasonable question. Their immediate reaction, "Wait, are you accusing me of something?" Suddenly, you find yourself backpedaling, defending your observation, even apologizing for being attentive. I call this the guilt transfer complex. In analytical psychology, this question triggers what I term the responsibility reversal. Instead of them explaining suspicious behavior, you are forced to justify your right to notice it. But here's the insight that changes everything. The power is not in their question, it's in your silence. Manipulators expect panic, rapid explanations, and desperate apologies. They never anticipate calm composure. The counter is elegantly simple. When someone asks, "Are you accusing me of something?" do not rush to respond. Apply what I call the therapeutic pause. Hold eye contact, wait 2 to 3 seconds, and then respond calmly. You may need only 3 words, but those words carry conscious power. Innocent people do not fear questions, only guilty people do. Your composed response forces them to confront their own shadow rather than hiding behind yours. Now the fourth question is pure psychological poison. Question 4. Would I ever lie to you? What I am about to reveal may change how you view every relationship in your life. Most people do not realize this, but this question is, in itself, a lie. not because of the words, but because of the intention behind them. Here's the trap. According to my research on persona manipulation, this question is not genuinely seeking an answer. This question is creating an emotional debt. The manipulator wants you to feel guilty for doubting them, even when your intuition is screaming warnings, I wrote. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Yet manipulators attempt to make you feel like a terrible person for being observant, cautious, and intuitive for simply being yourself. Here's the most revealing part. Those who ask this question are often exposing their own psychological state. I call this unconscious confession through overcompensation. Consider the pattern. Spouse hides their phone but becomes tearful, asking, "Would I ever lie to you?" Or a business partner refuses to show the books, yet feigns hurt, saying, "Come on, would I really deceive you?" I call this a performance of innocence. In depth psychology, genuine honesty does not perform, it simply exists. Honest people never feel the need to convince you they are incapable of lying. Their actions naturally generate what I call unconscious trust. You feel safe without them explaining why. Manipulators, however, have learned to mimic this feeling. They use emotional theater to bypass your logical mind and trigger your guilt complex. The tears, the wounded tone, the implied accusation that you are heartless for questioning them. Everything is designed to stop you from thinking and make you feel sorry. Here is the counter. When someone asks, "Would I ever lie to you?" do not take the bait. Apply what I call conscious questioning. Reflect and respond. That's not the right question. The question is, would I know if you did? This simple response flips the entire psychological frame. Liars thrive in emotional fog, but they wither under the light of conscious awareness. Your reply activates what I call the light of consciousness. And suddenly, the shadows have nowhere to hide. But the final question is by far the most dangerous. Question 5. Can't we just move on? What I am about to share may be the most critical psychological insight you ever learn. I discovered that this seemingly innocent question is actually the manipulator's nuclear option. When denial, distraction, and guilt fail, they resort to what I call forced forgetting, demanding that you abandon truth in favor of an illusion of peace. Here's what most people fail to understand. There is no conscious understanding without discomfort. Real resolution requires facing difficult truths. Manipulators, however, want to skip the pain entirely and move straight to your forgiveness. According to my research on psychological healing, moving on without comprehension is like placing a bandage over an infected wound. May look better on the surface, but the poison continues to spread beneath. Consider how this shows up in real life. Company caught in scandal urges employees, "Let's not dwell on the past. Focus on the future." An unfaithful partner pleads, "Why keep talking about it? We need to move forward." The critical point is this. These are not requests for healing. They are demands for amnesia. Manipulators don't want the issue resolved. They want it erased from your consciousness. I call this psychological burial. In analytical psychology, true healing occurs when the unconscious becomes conscious. Manipulators, in contrast, try to push everything back into the unconscious, where it cannot threaten their control. Here's the pattern I identified. First, they deny the problem exists, then they minimize it. Next, they blame you for creating it. Finally, when all else fails, they attempt to exhaust you into abandoning the search for truth. But there is an antidote. When someone says, "Can't we just move on?" apply what I call conscious anchoring. Pause, take a breath, and respond. I will move on when I understand what happened, not before. This single statement communicates that your peace is founded on clarity, not confusion, and that you cannot be rushed, pressured, or exhausted into forsaking the truth. I wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." That is precisely the leverage manipulators depend on, and now you know how to neutralize it. Manipulators rely on one thing above all: your emotional reaction. They depend on it to maintain control. Take that reaction away, and their entire system collapses. This is what I call conscious detachment. the ability to observe without being consumed. According to my research on individuation, the process of becoming psychologically whole, a manipulator's greatest fear is encountering someone who cannot be destabilized. Here is what I teach my clients. When you remain calm while others lose control, when you stay clear while others create confusion, and when you hold steady while others attempt to shake your reality, you achieve what I call psychological sovereignty. Sovereignty cannot be manipulated. I once wrote, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." Manipulators, however, want you to become what they need you to be. Confused, guilty, exhausted, and compliant. Before responding to any manipulative question, ask yourself what I call the consciousness question. Is this reaction coming from my authentic self, or from a complex they are trying to activate?
Ow.
Here's the truth I discovered. Manipulators do not attack your true self. They target your psychological complexes, the wounded, insecure, and vulnerable parts. They try to trigger "you're not good enough" complex, your guilt complex, your need to be liked complex. But when you operate from what I call the centered self, you become untouchable. Let me share the ultimate technique when confronted with any manipulative question. Take what I call the conscious pause. Breathe. Feel your feet on the ground. Connect with your authentic self. Then respond not from a complex, but from your center. This is the essence of what I wrote. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens. Manipulators want to keep you dreaming, lost in their projected reality. Consciousness, however, is the great awakener. Once awake, you can never be controlled again. Here's something that may surprise you. Every encounter with manipulation is actually a gift in disguise. I call it shadow work, the process of growing stronger through understanding. Darkness, I said. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Every manipulator who attempts to control you is showing you where to build stronger. Psychological boundaries. Every lie they tell trains you to detect truth more effectively. Every manipulation they attempt teaches you to spot the next one faster. According to my research in psychological development, those who try to manipulate you are often unconsciously contributing to your growth. They compel you to develop what I call conscious discrimination, the ability to instantly distinguish truth from deception, genuine connection from manipulation, and authentic care from control. Once you cultivate this ability, you become dangerous to manipulators not because you fight them, but because you see them. I discovered that being truly seen is the manipulator's greatest fear. Manipulators are shadow dwellers, functioning only in psychological darkness. When you shine the light of consciousness on their tactics, their power vanishes. They are like vampires exposed to sunlight. They cannot survive in the presence of aware, centered, and psychologically sovereign individuals. This is why I call conscious individuals the great threat to unconscious manipulation. This is your path to psychological liberation. Are you ready to embrace the truth that can set you free? I spent my career exploring one fundamental question. How do humans become psychologically free? What I discovered is this: freedom is not the absence of challenges, but consciousness in the midst of challenge. You now possess what I call seeing eyes. You can identify the 5 manipulative questions: the sensitivity attack, the trust demand, the accusation reversal, the innocence performance, and the forced forgetting. More importantly, you understand the psychology behind each one. As I wrote, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But here is what is even more terrifying for manipulators: someone who has fully accepted themselves and cannot be controlled. Because when you are no longer at war with yourself, no one can recruit you to fight against yourself. When you embrace your sensitivity instead of feeling ashamed of it, others cannot turn it into a weapon. When you are not desperate for approval, no one can withhold it to control you. When you are unafraid of conflict, abandonment loses its power to threaten you. This is what I call individuation, becoming so psychologically integrated that external manipulation becomes impossible. You are no longer a collection of reactive complexes pushed and pulled by others. You are a conscious individual, responding from choice rather than compulsion. And choice is the ultimate enemy of manipulation. Here is your practice, your initiation into psychological freedom. Next week, every time someone attempts to manipulate you emotionally, ask yourself, what complex in me is this person trying to activate? Then, instead of reacting from that complex, pause and respond from your conscious center. Watch how quickly manipulative people either adjust their behavior around you or simply disappear from your life. Because here is what I discovered. When you refuse to participate in manipulative games, you give those around you permission to be authentic as well. Your consciousness does more than protect you, it creates a space for genuine connection. This is the ultimate victory over manipulation. Just safeguarding yourself, but cultivating a field of authenticity that elevates everyone in your presence. You